Hello and welcome to the story time, the special edition story time, where we are going to read 100 short stories. All right, our volume one, part one. The volume one is going to have a theme of adventure, and we're going to start with our first story today. And just a couple reminders that these stories are more than 100 years old. They're written at varying times. But generally they're all more than 100 years old. And so it's different time period from what we live in now. That's a good thing to remember, that the world is going to be seen differently than we see the world today. Um, so there's not going to be as much, I don't know the right way to say it, cultural awareness, um, maybe some compassion. It's hard to say from our viewpoint um, to view things the way somebody 100 years, 200 years ago viewed the world. Because it's hard for us to understand what they were thinking. And a good way to understand that is to read some of the things that shows us some daily life. Now, I think in the adventure category, it's probably going to be a little bit exaggerated to make it much more adventurous. But we'll see. Now, and the other thing to remember, I haven't read these. I'm reading them for the first time with you. So there's a couple things. There will be times when maybe I don't know how to pronounce the name. I did look some up today just to make sure. I did skim through and saw a few that I didn't recognize right away. But in the future, I might come across something I don't know, and I'll do the best I can to pronounce it and maybe update you after the fact. Um, but I really kind of want to read it the first time with you. Um, so let's begin. Our first story is going to I did peek ahead here. It's going to be a little bit of a Western, so that's going to be fun. It's by Stuart Edward White, and it's called The Two-Gun Man. And chapter 1, The Cattle Rustlers. And our character's name is Buck Johnson. Buck Johnson was American-born, but with a black beard and a dignity of manner that had earned him the title of Senor. He had drifted into southeastern Arizona in the days of Cochise and Victorio and Geronimo. He had persisted, and so in time had come to control the water, and hence the grazing, of nearly all the Soda Springs Valley. His troubles were many and his difficulties great. There were the ordinary problems of lean and dry years. There were also the extraordinary problems of devastating Apaches, rivals for early and ill-defined range rights, and cattle rustlers. Senor Buck Johnson was a man of capacity, courage, and directness of method and perseverance, especially the latter. Therefore, he had survived to see the Apaches subdued, the range rights adjusted, his cattle increased to thousands, grazing the area of a principality. Now, all the energy and fire of his frontiersman nature he had turned to wiping out the third uncertainty of an uncertain business. He found it a task of some magnitude. For Senor Buck Johnson lived just north of that terra incognita, filled with the mystery of a double chance of death from man or the flaming desert known as the Mexican border. There, by natural gravitation, gathered all the desperate characters of 3 states and 2 republics. He who rode into it took good care that no one should ride behind him, lived warily, slept light, and breathed deep, when once he had again sighted the familiar peaks of Cochise's stronghold. No one professed knowledge of those who dwelt therein. They moved, mysterious as the desert illusions that compassed them about. As you rode, the ranges of mountains visibly changed form. The monstrous, snaky, sea-like growths of the cactus clutched at your stirrup. Mock lakes sparkled and dissolved in the middle distance. The sun beat hot and merciless. The powdered dry alkali beat hotly and mercilessly back. and strange, grim men, swarthy, bearded, heavily armed, with red-rimmed, unshifting eyes, rode silently out of the mists of illusion to look on you steadily, and then to ride silently back into the desert haze. They might be only the herders of the giant. They might be only the herders of the gaunt cattle, or again, they might belong to the lost legion that peopled the country. All you who could know was that of the men who entered in, but few returned. Directly north of this unknown land, you encountered parallel fences running across the country. They enclosed nothing, but offered a check to the cattle drifting toward the clutch of the renegades, and an obstacle to swift, dashing forays. Of cattle rustling, there are various forms. The boldest consists quite simply of running off a bunch of stock, hustling it over the Mexican line, and there selling it to some of the big Sonora ranch owners. Generally, this sort means war. Also are the subtler means, grading in skill from the rebranding through a wet blanket, through the crafty refashioning of a brand, to the various methods of separating the cow from her unbranded calf. In the course of his tasks, Senor Buck Johnson would have to do with them all. But at present, he existed in a state of warfare. Already, he had fought 2 pitched battles and had won them both. His cattle increased and he became rich. Nevertheless, he knew that constantly his resources were being drained. Time and again, he and his new Texas foreman, Jed Parker, had followed the trail of a stampeded bunch of 20 or 30, followed them on down through the Soda Springs Valley to cut drift fences, there to abandon them. For as yet, an armed force would be needed to penetrate the borderland. Once he and his men had experienced the glory of a night pursuit. Then, at the drift fences, he had fought one of his battles. But it was impossible adequately to patrol all parts of a range bigger than some eastern states. Buck Johnson did his best, but it was like stopping with sands the innumerable little leaks of a dam. Did his riders watch toward the Chiricahua? Then a score of beef steers disappeared from Grant's Pass 40 miles away? Pursuit here meant leaving cattle unguarded there. It was useless, and the senor soon perceived that sooner or later he must strike in a fence. For this purpose, he began slowly to strengthen the forces of his riders. Men were coming in from Texas. They were good men, addicted to the grass rope, the double cinch, and the oxbow stirrup. Senor Johnson wanted men who could shoot, and he got them. "Jed," said Senor Johnson to his foreman, "the next son of a gun that rustles any of our cows is sure loading himself full of trouble. We'll hit his trail and we'll stay with it, and we'll reach his cattle rustling conscience with a rope." So it came about that a little army crossed the drift fences and entered the border country. 2 days later, it came out, and mighty pleased to be able to do so. The rope had not been used. The reason for the defeat was quite simple. The thief had run his cattle through the lava beds, where the trail at once became difficult to follow. This delayed the pursuing party. They ran out of water, and as there was among them not one man well enough acquainted with the country to know where to find more, they had to return. "No use, Buck," said Jed. "We'd any of us come in on a gunplay, but we can't buck the desert. We'll have to get someone who knows the country." "That's all right. But where?" queried Johnson. "There's Pariza," suggested Parker. "It's the only town near that country." "Might get someone there," agreed the senor. Next day he rode away in search of a guide. The 3rd evening he was back again, much discouraged. "The country's no good," he explained. "The regular inhabitants are a set of Mexican bums and old soaks." The cowmen's all from north and don't know nothing more than we do. I found lots who claimed to know that country, but when I told them what I wanted, they shied like a colt. I couldn't hire 'em for no money to go down in that country. They ain't got the nerve. I took 2 days tour, too, and rode out to a ranch where they said a man lived who knew all about it down there. Nary riffle. Man looked all right, but his tail went down like the rest when I told him what we wanted. Seemed plumb scared to death, scared to death. Says he lives too close to the gang. Says they'd wipe him out sure if he done it. Seemed plumb scared. Buck Johnson grinned. I told him so, and he got hostile right off. Didn't seem no way scared of me. I don't know what's the matter with that outfit down there. They're plumb terrorized. That night, a bunch of steers was stolen from the very corrals of the home ranch. The home ranch was far north, near Fort Sherman itself, and so had always been considered immune from attack. Consequently, these steers were very fine ones. For the first time, Buck Johnson lost his head and his dignity. He ordered the horses. I'm going to follow that blank, there's actually blanks in the book, blank into Sonora. He shouted to Jed Parker, this thing's got to stop. You can't make her, Buck, objected the foreman. You'll get held up by the desert. And if that don't finish you, they'll tangle you up in all those little mountains down there and ambush you and massacre you. You know it damn well. I don't give a blank, exploded Senor Johnson. If they do, no man can slap my face and not get a run for it. Jed Parker communed with himself. Senor, said he at last, it's no good. You can't do it. You got to have a guide. You wait 3 days, and I'll get you one. You can't do it, insisted the senor. I tried every man in the district. Will you wait 3 days? Repeated the foreman. Johnson pulled loose his latigo? You might have to check that one. Latigo? Do you know what that is? His first anger had cooled. All right, he agreed, and you can say for me that I'll pay $5,000 in gold and give all the men and horses he needs to the man who has the nerve to get back that bunch of cattle and bring in the man who rustled them. I'll sure make this a test case. So Jed Parker set out to discover his man with nerve. All right, so that was chapter 1. Check back for chapter 2. See you tomorrow.